So in this video, I want to talk about the process of choosing a genre or choosing a style for component 3. During the planning process, or I should say the pre-planning process, before you do activity 1, you should have about 4 hours to figure out not only what song you're going to recreate, but also what style you are going to recreate it in. You always get given a list of 4 styles, and what usually happens is people rush in and they pick a style that they like, and they don't really think much more than that. So I want to talk a little bit more about I want to talk about some tips in how you can choose the genre that is a good idea, because there's usually 1 or 2 genres out of the 4 which are just simply better choices. You can choose what you like. Your teacher cannot make you pick a certain genre. All they can do is explain why one might be better than the other. Now, it's not just about which one you like or you know the most about. It's more to do with which style you can realistically create some music in. Now, the way I've thought about organizing my thoughts on which genre would be best for me would be by doing a mini component 1. What I mean by that is during your pre-planning time, you can essentially do a quick summary of those 4 genres. And you could do that with a Dr. Smith analysis, so dynamics, rhythm, structure, melody, instrumentation, texture, timbre, tonality, harmony, and also the techniques that are typically found in that style. Exactly what you did for component 1. And if you do this for at least 2 of the genres, or hopefully even all 4 of the genres, you can then compare and contrast which ones are going to be easier to write for, basically. And we're going to try that now with the 4 genres that were from the summer 2024 component 3 exam. So in 2024, the choices were disco, ambient, Britpop, and swing. Now, this was really convenient because in this exam year with this year 11 group, we had already talked about disco and swing, which was really convenient. We hadn't done Britpop. You guys have done Britpop, or my class have done Britpop for component 1, but this class had not. And we had never done ambient, and I've never taught ambient since. Now, I've attempted to do basically a spider diagram with the keywords from Dr. Smith. You can see I've got rhythm, structure, melody, instruments, tempo, texture, tonality, harmony. I've not included dynamics, mainly because I didn't really have enough room, and also dynamics is quite an easy one to talk about. It's usually just loud or quiet, or maybe it goes from loud to quiet or vice versa in certain sections. I've also left out timbre, but I've tried talking a little bit about timbre in instruments. They go hand in hand, to be honest. So if you can do this, if you can use your pre-planning research time to find out about the elements of your genres, you can then try and almost summarize what would be easy or difficult if you were doing disco. Now, I'm not going to talk about this whole thing. You could pause here and see what I've written about disco. But more importantly, once I had done this, I then gave a summary saying that there would be a potential difficulty in disco because there's an emphasis on live instruments. Disco uses a lot of live instruments. You could do this on BandLab with MIDI instruments and samples, but to try and make them sound like real players is going to be difficult. And disco is meant to be played by real players, and you get marked on your, authenticity. So you need to make it sound real. So disco is going to be quite challenging in that aspect. However, the drum beat that you would have to make, once you've got one, that drum beat would be repeated a lot, and therefore you could kind of copy and paste it a bit. You'd want to add some variety in your drum beat so it doesn't get too repetitive, but any kind of repetitive element in a component 3 genre is going to be really useful. Extended chords, so things like seventh chords, ninth chords, sus chords, slash chords, they might be complicated to start with, but again, once you've got a chord progression down, you can use that in throughout your song, and you don't have to necessarily write it again and again and again from scratch. A breakdown section in disco music, when the layers go down to just the bass line or just the drums, and then the keyboard joins back in, and then the guitar joins back in, or whatever. That's a really easy way to take the layers you've already used and reincorporate them one at a time and build that texture back up. And what's really useful there is it'll make your song much longer without actually having to make any new material. You're just using the material that you've already got to create a new energy and a new excitement. And then finally, syncopation is not an easy thing to get right, to make it sound effective and authentic and convincing, from my experience at least. So that was my thoughts on disco. I did the exact same thing with ambient. I thought that ambient would be quite easy because it uses a lot of slow tempo, and this means that you, with any genre that has a slow tempo, you'll write music for a while, and because it's a slow tempo, you will end up getting to the recommended time of 2 to 4 minutes much quicker. Whereas with a really fast genre like swing, which we're going to get to in a minute, swing's really fast and it's also really complicated. So you could spend hours writing what feels like loads of music, but when you actually press play on BandLab or on your recording, you'll find you've actually only written maybe 20 to 30 seconds of music, which can be really frustrating. With ambient music, though, because it changes so slowly over time, you get more done quite quickly. So it is essentially easier to write ambient music with that respect. No offense to ambient musicians out there. Pandiatonicism, it seems complicated, but it kind of means you can do whatever you like. A lot of ambient music, it might hold down a drone note. Let's see if I can create a quick drone on my keyboard here. So you can hold down a drone note and then you can just introduce more and more notes in your key. And it's a lot of trial and error, but that's pandiatonicism. That's a big, thick texture of lots of sounds overlapping. It's pandiatonicism. It's not far from what would be appropriate in an ambient song. It wouldn't sound as aggressive as my keyboard just sounded, though. Less emphasis on pulse. There's not really a pulse, which means you can't really go out of time, which is great because a lot of people struggle with keeping their music in time when they're using software in year 11. Reverb and delay are really easy to quickly add and make it sound more authentic. Something difficult about ambient, though, it could be difficult to make the layers blend. The whole thing about ambient music, nothing should stick out too much. It's not like Britpop, which we're about to do, where the singing element should stick out and be the bit that we really focus on. So the whole point of ambient is the opposite, really, to try and make everything feel like it's all melded together without anything standing out too much. Speaking of Britpop, I thought that Britpop would be easy in some ways because the sections that you make, the verses, the choruses, they tend to repeat in a typical Britpop song without loads of variations. So once you've made your verse and you've made it sound really good and authentic, you can repeat that verse but with different lyrics. Once you've got your chorus, you can repeat your chorus with the same lyrics. That's what choruses tend to do in Britpop songs. You might not have much experience making a drum beat in any style, but once you've written your Britpop style drum beat, you can then use that same drum beat for the whole song if you like. There are plenty of Britpop songs which 99% of the time the drummer is drumming, they're playing the same drum beat. You might have to think about drum fills, or rather, if you can think about drum fills and create some original drum fills, you will be looking at getting higher marks because you've thought of that extra layer of complexity. A potential downslide, ideally you'll want to sing it. Now, you might not be a singer yourself. You might know someone who does sing, so you might be able to convince them to sing your chosen song's lyrics in a Britpop style. And the thing with Britpop is the singers for Britpop bands are not always, classically trained or professionally trained. They tend to teach themselves and just get the job done, and that's part of the appeal. So it could be reassuring that you don't need the best singer of all time in your recording. And the instruments in Britpop, guitars, bass drums, they're fairly common modern instruments which are not too difficult to learn about. So I would argue that you all know someone who plays a bit of guitar. You probably all know someone who plays drums. So it's easy to kind of collaborate with other musicians and get them helping you. As long as you're directing them in what sort of sound you want, you will probably have access to at least one person who can make your sonic dreams come true, for lack of a better sentence. So I thought Britpop wasn't a bad one to choose. Swing is a really cool style of music. It's a style of jazz from 1930s, 1940s, but it is complicated. Any kind of jazz is complicated. So here are some things I thought about swing. Swing/jazz chords or harmonies are really complicated, taking many months, if not years, to get a strong grasp of. Almost every single chord in jazz is some kind of 7th or 9th or 13th or sharp 5 or flat 5 or diminished 7th or something. The harmony in jazz music is really complicated. Not only that, but jazz rhythm is also really different. It's based on a swing feel, which means everything's felt in triplets, which not all modern music is felt in triplets. Most modern music is felt as straight quavers or straight eighth notes. Swung quavers or swung eighth notes are really different, and we're not all used to them, or you guys might not be used to them. Improvisation is a really important part to jazz music and swing music. And if you're creating music on BandLab or another DAW, you're going to need to try and make your music sound improvised. And there's two ways of doing that, really. You either actually get a player to improvise a solo. You'd obviously tell them what the chords are or what the key is that they're improvising in, maybe what musician you want them to imitate, or you have to compose a solo that sounds as if it was improvised. And that's really difficult too, because now you're talking about jazz melody, which uses lots of chromatic notes and color notes and all of these techniques which take a long time to learn unless you're already experienced in them. Proper big band swing usually has lots of instruments, many that you may not have heard much or know how to write for / what they can kind of do. So saxophones, trumpets, trombones, you might not have ever seen one of these instruments, let alone thought about writing for them. If you can't tell, as cool as swing is, as cool as writing for a swing band would be, it is going to be hard. And finally, I decided to rate the difficulty of the 4 genres in this exam series. And I thought that ambient would be the easiest, mainly because it's so slow and so simple in terms of its elements. Britpop wouldn't be too difficult to write for, I don't think. Disco would be a step up from that. And swing would just be dangerously difficult. Again, you can pick whatever you like. You're allowed to choose whatever genre you like and any song you like. The teacher cannot tell you what you're allowed to do. All they can do before you start component 3 in its exam conditions is that there is going to be a genre that is easier than the others, or there's going to be a genre that is much harder than the others. You need to be able to figure that out now using some of the skills that I've highlighted in this video. You need to be able to analyze the genres that you are given and make an educated decision on which one you're going to use. Finally, as a bit of a bonus, I suppose, during the pre-planning phase, as it's called, the pre-activity 1 phase, you are allowed to use the internet to find your resources. You're allowed to use the internet when you're filling in these spider diagrams. All of this spider diagram material, by the way, could be condensed into note format, and you could even take this into your activity 1 exam when you have to write about what you're going to make and how you're going to make it. You could easily use a sheet like this as your planning. Bullet points, these are basically bullet points, or if they're not, you could definitely turn them into bullet points. But if you didn't already know what the rhythm of disco is, or maybe the harmony of disco, you can use AI. You're absolutely allowed to use AI. I've been using AI to help answer some of these, and I've been checking that it's not a load of rubbish. So, for example, I typed in here, what is a typical disco chord progression? And it told me a little bit of preamble before telling me here are some very common ones. And it tells me in the key of A, the chords A, G, and A. And I can play that and I can think, that would possibly work. Or I could try this one down here in the key of A minor, G, F, and G. Whoops, excuse me. Now, this alone just tells you what the chords are. It might not necessarily tell you how you're going to play them. And in order to find that out, you're going to need to go and listen to some disco songs. And again, ChatGPT can tell you which ones you might want to go and listen to. You could do that for all of these elements if you like. I would use a combination of actually listening to the music and researching with other articles besides just AI. You know, there's Wikipedia, which is not the most reliable thing. There's loads of videos on YouTube and probably TikTok now that talk about these genres in detail. There'll be articles from music websites, Rolling Stones or Music Radar. There'll be these websites that talk about the genres. The more research you can squeeze in, the more accurate or the better of a picture you'll have when you decide which one of these genres you're going to write in. So yeah, I hope that's useful. I hope you can use this video to more confidently decide which genre you're going to end up writing in, because once you pick a genre, you really don't want to be changing your mind. You can change your mind halfway through the project, but it's risky because once you started, you're not really allowed to go back. Well, no, you're not allowed to go back and plan again. Once you've made a plan and you've figured out what resources you'll need and what elements you're going to change and what chords you're going to do and blah, 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 you're kind of set from that moment on. So be prepared, be smart.